Picture a room. Not a grand room. Not the kind of room that shows up in period dramas. All velvet curtains and firelight and women in evening gowns looking meaningful out of tall windows. No. Picture a room 8 feet wide and 10 feet long. A ceiling so low a tall man would graze it with his hat. One window facing a brick wall 4 feet away. A single iron bedstead with a mattress that someone has slept on for at least 15 years. Possibly more. It's spring-shaped by bodies that are gone now, leaving impressions in the horsehair stuffing like the outline of a person who decided to simply evaporate. A washstand with a basin, a jug that holds maybe a pint and a half when it's full, which it currently is not. A wardrobe with one door that doesn't quite close, held shut by a folded piece of cardboard wedged into the gap. A rag rug on bare floorboards, the rag part faded to a uniform grey that suggests it was once something else. Red, maybe. Blue. Hard to say now. A fireplace. 6 inches across the grate. No coal in it. No coal in this house until October, and it is currently the 3rd of September. And on the mantelpiece above it, a handwritten card in a careful copper plate. No cooking in rooms. No male visitors above the ground floor. Gas lights out at 10 o'clock. Rent due every Monday morning without exception. Mrs. E. Pemberton. That card cost 7 shillings and 6pence a week. That's what you paid for this room, this jug, this wardrobe, with its cardboard hinge, this mattress shaped like someone else. That's about 1/3 of what you earn. And here's the thing. In 1887, if you're a young woman who has come to London alone from the countryside, a room like this specific room, with its jug and its mattress and its landlady's rules posted on the mantelpiece, this room is not a disappointment. This room is the plan working. So, get comfortable. Let's talk about what a month in a Victorian boarding house actually looked like. Not the romantic version. Not the Jane Austen version, where everyone is witty and the food is always described as excellent. The real version. The version where the bacon fat on Tuesday is the same bacon fat that was on the plate on Sunday, reheated twice and gaining a kind of archaeological significance. Where the bathroom is shared by 11 women, and there is hot water available for approximately 45 minutes per morning total, and you have to be fast or clever or both to get any of it. Where the walls are thin enough that you know the exact nature of your neighbour's cough, which cough is grief, which cough is cold, which cough is something else entirely that you try very hard not to think about. I make these history stories, and I honestly have no idea if you're listening to fall asleep or if you're the sort of person who finds Victorian domestic misery genuinely fascinating. Which, fair enough, honestly. Some of us have a type. Either way, subscribe if you feel like it. Find somewhere warm to listen. Here we go. The advertisement said, "Superior accommodation for young ladies of good character. Central situation near omnibus routes. Breakfast and supper provided. Sitting room for leisure use. All modern conveniences. Strictest propriety maintained. Apply Mrs. E. Pemberton, 14 Cold Harbour Street, Islington. 7 shillings and 6pence a week." That's what it cost in 1887. To put that in some kind of context, you earn 22 shillings a week. That's your salary at Messrs. Hartington and Webb Solicitors of Gray's Inn Road, where you sit in a small room off the main corridor and operate a Remington No. 2 typewriting machine for 8 hours a day, 5.5 days a week. 22 shillings sounds reasonable until you do the arithmetic. 7 and 6 for the room. Call it 8 shillings after you've bought a bar of soap and a new ribbon for the typewriter when Mr. Hartington notices the old one is getting pale. 3pence a day for omnibus fare. That's 1 and 9 a week if you take it both ways, and you can't always afford to. A penny here, tuppence there, for the small catastrophes that make up a life. Thread to mend stockings, a stamp for a letter home, tea on the days when the cold gets into your bones so deeply that the only cure is something hot to put your hands around. Do the sums, they don't add up. Not comfortably, not with any margin for emergencies, but they add up enough, and enough is what you came to London for. Not luxury, not adventure exactly, though there's some of that too, whether you want it or not. Just enough. Enough to be independent, enough to not go back to your parents' house in Shropshire and wait around to become someone's wife in a village where you already know everyone and nothing is ever going to change. You're 23 years old. You came to London 6 weeks ago with a Gladstone bag, a letter of introduction from your father's cousin, and enough money for 3 weeks' board while you found work. You found work in the second week, which was either luck or the fact that you can type at 40 words per minute, and most girls your age can barely manage 25. Either way, here you are, 14 Cold Harbour Street, Mrs. Pemberton's establishment for young ladies of good character. Your name is Clara Webb, no relation to the Webbs of Hartington and Webb, which is a coincidence so mildly awkward that you've learned to get your mention of it in early before someone else notices and finds it funnier than it is. You're from a village called Nesscliffe, 20 miles outside Shrewsbury, where your father is a schoolmaster, and your mother keeps a very tidy garden, and your younger sister is 3 years from needing the same escape route you just used. You've been in London 6 weeks, and you still, sometimes, in unguarded moments, find yourself slightly stunned that any of this is real. Let's talk about the house, because Mrs. Pemberton's is not just a building, it's a system. It has its own physics, its own rules, its own logic, and the sooner you understand that logic, the better your chances of surviving the month without social catastrophe. 14 Cold Harbour Street is a mid-terrace Georgian house on a street that was respectable 40 years ago and is now working hard to hold its position. The houses on either side are also boarding establishments. Number 12 takes men, lower rates, higher noise, and across the street is a chandler's and a small dairy that smells of sour milk and sawdust every morning from 6 onwards. The house itself is 3 floors plus a basement. Ground floor, the entrance hall, the sitting room, the dining room, and Mrs. Pemberton's private parlour, which you have seen the inside of exactly once, under circumstances you would rather forget. First floor, 3 bedrooms. These are the good rooms. Large windows, higher ceilings. The fireplace grates in these rooms are actually functional, and the coal allowance, 1 scuttle per week per room, October through March, is also slightly more generous up here. Second floor, 3 more rooms, smaller. These are the rooms where women have been at Mrs. Pemberton's for somewhere between 1 and 3 years. The reward for endurance is eventually a better room. You're on the second floor, room number 7, and then the attic. The attic has 2 rooms. These are the rooms you get when you're new, very young, or very poor, or all 3. They're the rooms with the low ceilings and the single windows facing brick walls and the mattresses shaped like ghosts. You were in the attic for your first 2 weeks. You moved to the second floor when the woman in room 7 left for Brighton to look after her mother's health, and Mrs. Pemberton offered you the room at a rate of 7 sixpence, the same as the attic, which you've since learned is not quite standard, but Mrs. Pemberton seemed to think you were the reliable sort and wanted to hold the room. You have no idea what made her think that. You were in a state of near constant low-level terror for the first 2 weeks, and you're fairly certain it showed. But something about your face apparently communicates reliability, which is useful and slightly uncomfortable. Now let's talk about the people. Because in a boarding house, the people are everything. They are your neighbours and your dining companions and your competition for the bathroom and the good chair by the sitting room fire. They are the source of most of what is interesting and most of what is terrible about your daily life. There are 11 women in this house. Mrs. Pemberton herself doesn't sleep here. She has a sister in Barnsbury who she stays with, but she's present from 7 in the morning until 10 at night, and her presence fills the house the way a smell fills a room. You don't always see her, but you always know she's there. She's a small woman, perhaps 60, with steel-grey hair parted severely in the middle and a face that has arranged itself over the years into an expression of permanent pre-disappointment. Not quite suspicion, more like the face of someone who has seen enough to know that disappointment is always coming and has simply decided to meet it halfway. She's been running this establishment for 23 years. She has seen, she once told you over the breakfast table in a rare conversational moment, every possible variety of young woman who comes to London with ideas. She said, ideas the way some people say head lice. With a kind of grim resignation, you chose not to ask which variety she considered you to be. There is Miss Agnes Thornton. She is 31, which in 1887 means she's making a life rather than waiting for one. She works as a bookkeeper for a firm of import merchants near London Bridge. She has been at Mrs. Pemberton's for 6 years, which means she has one of the first-floor rooms, the one with the working fireplace and the window overlooking the garden rather than the street. She is brisk, sharp-tongued in a way that could be kindness or cruelty depending on what she's doing with it, and she has a talent for eating her supper extremely fast and leaving the dining room before anyone can get into a real conversation with her. You like her. She makes you slightly anxious. Both things are true at once. There is Miss Ivy Watkins, who is 19 and works in a millinery on the Strand, and cries on Sunday evenings from approximately 7 to 8, quietly but consistently, as though grief has a schedule she's obligated to keep. She's from somewhere in Wales and has a beautiful singing voice that she uses only when she thinks she's alone in the house, which she never actually is. There is Miss Edith Ramsbottom, who dislikes her own surname intensely and goes by Edith, just Edith, with a firmness that discourages any mention of the other part. She's a teacher at a Church of England school in Clerkenwell. She's 26, very tall, very serious about educational reform, and keeps a copy of Mary Wollstonecraft in her room that she reads quietly and then hides under her mattress whenever Mrs. Pemberton comes to check the rooms for cleanliness. This is not paranoia. Mrs. Pemberton does check the rooms. You know this because you came back early one afternoon and found her in yours, examining the contents of your washstand with an expression that suggested she had opinions about your brand of tooth powder. And then there is Miss Hartley, Eleanor Hartley, 25. Works as a lady's companion to a widow in Bloomsbury, which means she travels to the widow's house every morning and runs her errands and reads to her, and is generally present in whatever capacity the widow requires, and then comes back every evening smelling of the widow's particular perfume, violet water and something medicinal, and looking either deeply bored or secretly amused, depending on what the widow's been up to. Miss Hartley is beautiful in a way that seems almost professionally inconvenient in this particular house. She has dark hair and a way of holding herself that suggests she has been told, at some point in her life, that people find her arresting, and has decided this is both useful and occasionally exhausting. She is always perfectly turned out. Her boots are always clean. Her collar is always fresh. Even at breakfast, when the rest of you are functioning at perhaps 60% capacity, in the grey 7 o'clock light, Miss Hartley looks like she has recently been painted. You've been watching Miss Hartley, not in a suspicious way, in a curious way, because there's something about her that doesn't quite fit the picture. Something just slightly off. The way a room sometimes looks different when one small thing has been moved. You can't name it yet, but you will. Let me start your day. It's September, the 3rd, a Tuesday, 6:30 in the morning, and outside the window of room 7 the London sky is doing the thing where it can't decide whether to stay dark or go grey, and is currently managing both at once. Your eyes open. The ceiling is 8 feet above you, and in this half-light it looks lower. For a moment, just a moment, you think you're in Nesscliffe. In your own room, with the sloped ceiling and the view of the beech tree and the sound of your mother downstairs at some point between 6:30 and 7, starting her day with the specific sequence of sounds that your body has memorized without your permission. The kitchen door, the coal scuttle, the pump in the scullery. Then the smell hits you, and you know exactly where you are. You need to understand something about the smell of a Victorian boarding house. It's not a single smell. It's never a single smell. It's layers, a sediment of living built up over years. First, there's coal smoke. It gets into everything. The walls exhale it. The curtains are saturated with it. Your hair smells of it after half a day. In any room that's been heated by a coal fire in the last decade. In September, the fires aren't lit yet, but the memory of coal hangs in the fabric of the house, the way old arguments hang in a family's silences. Under that, damp. The particular cold damp of a London house that faces north and gets direct sun for approximately 40 minutes a day, around noon, through 2 east-facing windows for 3 weeks in late July. Under the damp, something savoury and faintly sad. Last night's supper, boiled mutton and turnips, which Mrs. Collins the cook made with all the enthusiasm of someone carrying out a sentence. Boiled mutton is not a difficult thing to make badly, but Mrs. Collins has found a way. The smell has made its way through the floorboards from the kitchen below and settled into the house overnight like a fog. And under all of that, something you've stopped noticing enough to name precisely, but that your body knows is there. The smell of 11 women living in close quarters, sharing one bathroom, one coal allowance, one kitchen they're not allowed to use, and a sitting room with furniture that has absorbed decades of other people's anxiety. It smells like effort, like the sustained daily effort of maintaining respectability on a budget that doesn't really accommodate it. Welcome to 14 Cold Harbour Street, September 1887. Your name is Clara Webb. You're 23 years old, and you've been here 6 weeks, and you need to get to the bathroom before Miss Ramsbottom does, or you will have cold water. The hallway outside your room is dark. There's a gas lamp at either end, but they're turned down to their lowest setting at night, and in the morning the housemaid, a girl named Nora, who is about 15 and moves through the house like a small ship navigating through fog, turns them off entirely at 7 and relies on daylight. Such as it is. Such as it is. The bathroom is on the first floor landing. This is one bathroom for 11 women in 1887, having a bathroom at all, a room with an actual fixed bath and running cold water and a geyser for hot. This is modern. This is a selling point. The advertisement mentioned all modern conveniences, and this is what it meant. When your grandmother was young, the hot water came from the kitchen in jugs. Here it comes from a copper geyser bolted to the wall above the bathtub that makes a sound like a dying organ pipe when you light it, and then produces hot water for approximately 8 minutes before deciding it's done. 8 minutes of hot water. The geyser reheats in about 25 minutes if the pressure is right, which it frequently isn't. So, 11 women, 1 bathroom, a geyser that produces hot water for 8 minutes per cycle, and everyone needs to be washed and dressed and presentable by 8 o'clock to catch either the omnibus or the Underground Railway, or to simply walk to wherever they work. The system that has evolved, and it is a system arrived at through what you imagine was a period of intense negotiation and possibly 1 or 2 genuine confrontations, goes like this. First floor women have priority from 6:30 to 7. Second floor from 7 to 7:30. Attic from 7:30 to 8. This sounds orderly. It almost is. The problem is that 3 of the first floor women also happen to be the ones who take the longest, particularly Miss Vickers, who works in a West End dressmaker's and must be turned out to a standard that requires her hair to be done entirely before she leaves the bathroom, which takes, you have timed this accidentally, 22 minutes on a standard day and closer to 30 on days when she has a fitting with an important client. So by the time you get to the bathroom at 7, you have however much heat is left in the geyser after Mrs. Alderton and Miss Vickers and Miss Thornton have used it. Today, the geyser produces what you describe as enthusiastically tepid water, not cold, not warm, the temperature of a very mild disappointment. You wash quickly, efficiently. You've gotten fast at this in 6 weeks. Your whole morning has compressed itself through necessity into something closer to a military operation than a routine. Face, neck, hands, hair pinned without being elaborate about it. You don't have the time for elaborate, and you're not sure you have the talent for it either, which your mother would call a pity, and you have decided to call the efficiency. The mirror in the bathroom is small and slightly foxed around the edges. Your reflection in it looks like someone you know seen through a window. Clean enough, presentable enough, ready enough. You go to get dressed. Your clothes are a language. In 1887, they're always a language, but in a boarding house full of working women, they're a particularly precise one. Every woman in this house has spent time and thought on what she can afford to look like, and what she can afford to look like communicates a great deal about what she earns and where she works and what she hopes for. Your working dress is dark grey wool, 2 years old, bought second-hand from a shop on Rosebery Avenue that sells good used clothing at prices you can reach if you're careful. It was let out at the seams slightly to fit you. The woman it belonged to was smaller across the shoulders, and the hem was turned up 1/2 inch. If you look carefully, you can see the ghost of the original hemline above the current one, like a watermark. The collar is white cotton, detachable and washable. You wash it on Sunday evenings and leave it to dry overnight on the washstand, and put it on slightly damp on Monday mornings, because there is no time and no ironing facilities in the room to dry it properly first. By Tuesday, it has taken on the slightly wilted character that most of your collars have by Tuesday. By Wednesday, it is beginning to look like something that has had a full week. But it's clean. Clean matters more than anything else. In 1887, among women like you, working women, respectable working women, the kind who live in boarding houses rather than servants' quarters or their parents' houses, cleanliness is not just hygiene, It is argument. It is defence. It is the daily statement that whatever else is true, you are not slovenly, not careless, not the kind of girl who doesn't take care. The taking care is visible, and it is meant to be seen. Over the dress, a jacket. Darker grey, a slightly better cut. Bought new from a department store in Holborn 18 months ago, when your position at Hartington and Webb was confirmed and you decided to invest in your own credibility. It fits well. It is the item of clothing you feel most like yourself in, which is probably revealing in some way you're not fully ready to examine. Boots, black, well made, worn carefully. You brush them every evening before bed because the London streets will ruin them in a week if you don't, and new boots cost more than a week's rent. You are dressed. You are presentable. You look like what you are. A young woman of moderate means and entirely respectable character who works in a solicitor's office and takes care of her things and has opinions about all sorts of matters, but has learned to be quite selective about expressing them. Down the stairs to breakfast. The dining room is at the back of the ground floor, looking out through a window that faces the small strip of garden. The garden has a pear tree in it that has never, in anyone's recent memory, produced an actual pear, and a patch of lawn the size of a large tablecloth, and a wall covered in ivy that Mrs. Pemberton considers ornamental, and the rest of you consider a place where something you cannot identify lives. There are 2 tables pushed together to make one long one, with chairs for 11 plus Mrs. Pemberton's own chair at the head, which she occupies most mornings for part of the meal, and which is noticeably larger and better padded than all the others. The breakfast is always the same. This is important. In 1887 boarding houses, the meals are the contract. The advertisement said, breakfast and supper provided, and Mrs. Pemberton provides them with a strict literal interpretation of provides. They exist. They are on the table at the time specified. Whether they are enjoyable is a separate question that was not part of the agreement. Breakfast is porridge, made thick enough to stand a spoon in and served in a tureen that goes around the table. Toast, 2 slices per person, made in the kitchen and placed in a rack that ensures it will be completely cold by the time it reaches the far end of the table. Butter, 1 small pot. Communal. A pot of marmalade that appears on Tuesdays, Thursdays and Saturdays. On the other days there is treacle, which Mrs. Pemberton considers an adequate substitute, and the rest of you have collectively decided not to argue about. A pot of tea, 2 cups per person unless you're early, enough to get a third from the first pot before it runs out. That's it. That is morning. Every morning. For as long as you live here. You learn the rhythms of this table. Miss Thornton arrives first, every day, sits in the same chair, and eats her breakfast in approximately 6 minutes while reading yesterday's newspaper, which Mrs. Pemberton takes from the previous day's edition of the Daily Telegraph and leaves on the sideboard. The newspaper is always a day old. This is also not a coincidence. Current news costs more than yesterday's news. Miss Ramsbottom arrives second and eats quickly, but engages in conversation, usually about the school, specifically about the difficulty of teaching children who haven't had enough to eat to concentrate, a topic she returns to with the devotion of someone tending a fire. She is trying to get something done about the school's dinner situation, and has written 6 letters to the school board this year. 3 of them have received replies. None of the replies have said yes. Miss Watkins arrives late, always. She takes her 2 slices of cold toast and sits at the far end of the table near the window, and looks at the garden with an expression that could be peace, or could be something she's decided to call peace because the alternative is too exhausting. You have arrived at the table early enough to get the porridge while it's still warm. This is the small victory that begins your day. You sit down, pour your tea, feel the first heat of it pass through the cup into your hands, and the hands matter. Let me tell you about the hands. Your hands are your tools. They operate the typewriting machine for 8 hours a day, 5.5 days a week. They hit the keys of the Remington with a force that is precisely calibrated between two light, which produces faint letters the solicitors can't read, and too heavy, which produces mistakes you can't correct without scraping the surface of the paper with an India rubber that leaves a grey smudge and makes the whole page look amateur. After 6 weeks of this, your hands have changed. The first 2 fingers of your right hand have a slight callus at the tip. The inside of your left wrist aches from a particular reaching motion required by the left-hand shift key. Your forearms are permanently slightly tense, a low-grade bracing that you carry even when you're not at the machine. In the mornings your hands are stiff, not terribly, not like an old woman's arthritis, but stiff enough that the first cup of tea in both hands, feeling the heat transfer through the china into the palms, into the joints of the fingers, is not luxury. It's therapy. It's the beginning of getting your hands ready to work. You wrap both hands around your teacup and feel them wake up. Miss Hartley comes down at 7:22. You've noticed this, the timing, 7:22. Not 7:15, not 7:25, almost never later, sometimes slightly earlier, but 7:22 is the modal point, the most common. You've noticed a lot of things about Miss Hartley. She sits down gracefully, genuinely gracefully, without performance, just the habit of a woman who has been told since childhood to carry herself well, and has done it long enough that it's simply how she moves. She pours her tea, she takes her toast. She eats with a slightly distant expression, as though she is listening to something just outside the audible range. She catches you watching and gives you a very small smile that communicates absolutely nothing, and somehow everything. Good morning, Miss Webb. Good morning, Miss Hartley. And that's all. But this morning, and this is the morning I want to start your story properly, the one that begins the thread that runs through the whole month. This morning, there's something different. Her collar. Eleanor Hartley's collar is every single morning flawlessly fresh. She must wash them every night, or have them washed, or possess some number of collars that defeats normal accounting. This is one of the things you've noted about her. The perfect collar is a daily fact, as reliable as sunrise. This morning the collar has a small smudge on it, near the left side. Not large, not obvious unless you're looking, and you are looking, but you're not going to examine too carefully. It could be anything, a mark from the sleeve of a coat, an ink stain that survived washing. Nothing, really, but you notice it, and you file it away, and you don't yet know why. The omnibus stop is 4 minutes from the front door if you walk briskly. You always walk briskly. The streets of Islington at 7:45 in the morning do not reward slowness, and I need you to understand what London in 1887 looks like at this hour, because it looks nothing like any London you've probably imagined. The horse-drawn omnibus that runs down the Angel toward King's Cross and then along Holborn is large and open-topped and carries people on 2 levels, inside and on the roof. The inside costs more, 2p for the stretch you need versus a penny on top. You take the top in dry weather and silently hate the circumstances that make you calculate this. But before the omnibus, there's the walk, the streets. Cold Harbour Street at 7:45 on a Tuesday morning in September, 1887 is a particular kind of noise. There are horses. There are always horses. You stop really hearing them after a few weeks the way you stop hearing clocks. But in your first days in London, the sound of iron-shod hooves on stone was constant and overwhelming. A drumming that came from every direction at once and didn't stop. The horses pull carts, carriages, omnibuses, drays full of barrels, flat carts piled with goods that wobble dangerously on the corners. The smell from the horses is, well, in 1887, London has approximately 300,000 horses in it. 300,000 horses. They produce collectively somewhere in the region of 1,000 tons of manure per day. 1,000 tons every day. This is deposited on the streets. The crossing sweepers, boys and old men who work the busier corners with brooms and quick judgment, clear a path for pedestrians to cross without destroying their boots. You give the crossing sweeper at the end of Cold Harbour Street a halfpenny on mornings when you're feeling flush, which is roughly twice a week. The smell is not decorative. It is structural. It is part of what London smells like, the way salt is part of what the sea smells like. On top of that, this morning, there's fog. Not the famous pea souper that comes more in winter, when the temperature drops and the coal fires all burn at once, and the fog turns yellow and thick as a blanket. This is an early autumn fog, cleaner in relative terms, more grey than yellow. It sits about 12 feet above the street level, turning the upper floors of buildings into suggestions as when king the gas lamps, still lit, not yet extinguished, into soft orange globes that look like something out of a fairy story, or possibly a nightmare. You walk through it quickly. Your boots on the pavement make a particular sound on this foggy morning, flatter, slightly muffled, as though the air is absorbing the sound before it can bounce back. Ahead of you, the sounds of the city are present but slightly displaced, slightly wrong, the way things sound when you hear them through a wall. A knife grinder pushes his cart past you, the wheels squealing on the wet stone. He's going the other direction. He hasn't started calling yet. A boy goes by with a bundle of newspapers under his arm, his voice cutting through the fog. Morning Post, Telegraph, Morning Post. He's maybe 12, wearing boots 2 sizes too large that clap on the pavement as he runs. He's been up since 4. He'll be at this until 10. After 10, the morning papers are less useful. The prices drop, the profit margins close. And when I say profit margins, I don't mean the kind the merchants talk about at their clubs. I mean the difference between whether this boy eats today, that difference. The omnibus stop at the Angel. The omnibus arrives 3 minutes late, which is approximately on time by the standards of horse-drawn transport in 1887. It's already half full when it gets to you, and you find a seat on the outside upper level, between a large man reading a folded newspaper and a woman in morning dress who smells of lavender and is staring at nothing with the patience of someone who's been staring at nothing for some time. The omnibus lurches forward. London opens up around you. Gray's Inn Road runs southwest from the Angel, down past the great greyness of the Inns of Court and into Holborn. The buildings here are tall and serious, the offices of serious men doing serious business with a great deal of paper. Hartington and Webb, solicitors, occupies the first floor of a Georgian building on the east side of Gray's Inn Road, accessible via a door painted in what was once black and is now something closer to a very dark grey, and up a flight of stairs that has a carpet runner held in place by brass rods that are always slightly loose. You catch your foot on the third stair roughly once a week. The office smells of paper and dust and the specific kind of stillness that comes from rooms where documents are kept. Old documents, contracts going back decades, tied in ribbon, stored in tin boxes labelled in copperplate handwriting by men who are now dead. There is something slightly airless about it, as though the documents are competing with the humans for the available oxygen and winning. Mr. Arthur Hartington is the senior partner. He is 62, thin as a bundle of legal documents himself, with a pointed beard going grey at the tips and the posture of a man who has spent decades leaning slightly forward over a desk. He is not unkind. He is not particularly interested in you as a person, but he is fair in the way that people are fair when fairness is simply the most efficient policy. He said, when he hired you, Miss Webb, can you operate the Remington? You said you could. He said, the salary is 22 shillings per week. You will begin at 8 and finish at 5, half-day Saturday. You will produce documents as required. You will not make errors. You said, understood. He said, good. That was the entire conversation. Your room, and it is called your room, possessively, as though the typewriting machine has become an extension of you, is off the main corridor between the filing room and the clerk's room. It is approximately 10 feet by 8 feet. There is a window that faces an inner courtyard, which receives no direct sunlight. There is a desk. There is the Remington No. 2. There is a straight-backed chair that you have folded your jacket over to create a slightly more padded cushion, because after 2 hours on the original surface, your lower back begins a low-level protest that escalates throughout the day. Now let me tell you about the machine. The Remington No. 2 typewriter was introduced in 1878. By 1887 it has been through several iterations and refinements, and it is a serious heavy piece of equipment. Cast iron and steel and rubber, sitting on a wooden base, it weighs about 10 pounds and makes a sound when you operate it that is somewhere between a mechanical heartbeat and someone hitting a wooden surface with small hammers at irregular intervals. The keys require real force. Not enormous force, but consistent force, maintained over hours. Each keystroke is a small commitment. You press down, the type bar rises and strikes the inked ribbon against the paper. The carriage advances 1 space. At the end of a line, you push the carriage return lever. A satisfying mechanical sound, a click and ring of the bell that says line complete, line complete, line complete, and start again. 40 words per minute is roughly 240 keystrokes. Per minute, over 8 hours, minus breaks, minus time for loading fresh paper, adjusting the ribbon, fixing the occasional type bar that sticks or crosses with another. Call it 7 hours of actual typing. That's around 100,000 keystrokes per day. 100,000 small, forceful commitments, every working day. This is what your hands are for now. You sit down. You roll in the first sheet of paper, a contract, a conveyance, something for a client whose property is moving from one party to another. Mr. Webb, yes, the other Webb, has made his notes in his neat handwriting in pencil on a draft. And your job is to produce the clean final version that will be signed. You flex your fingers once, twice. The fog outside the courtyard window is thinning. You begin. This indenture, made the 3rd day of September in the year of our Lord 1887 between. The keys come down. The bell rings at the end of each line. The morning begins. Let me pause here for a moment and explain something. Because if you're going to understand what a month in a Victorian boarding house feels like, actually feels like, not the sanitized version, not the one that gets romanticized into something cozy and character building. You need to understand the rules, not just the written ones posted on the mantelpiece of every room, the unwritten ones. The rules that are enforced not by Mrs. Pemberton herself, but by the silent collective weight of 11 women living in close proximity, all of them engaged in the same project, all of them aware that the project could fail at any moment for any one of them. The project, in case it needs naming, is respectability. In 1887, for a woman living alone in London, a working woman, unmarried, without family in the city, respectability is not a preference. It is infrastructure. It is the thing you build your life on, and if it cracks, everything built on top of it comes down. This is not melodrama. This is the mechanics of the system. If you lose your reputation, and in 1887 reputation means something very specific, it means that people believe you are a woman of good character, which in turn means people believe you're not conducting yourself in ways that polite society would find objectionable, which in turn primarily means that people believe you're not involved with any man outside the formal structure of courtship and engagement. If that reputation cracks, the consequences cascade with remarkable speed. Your employer fires you. References become unavailable. Other employers don't hire women without references. Boarding houses like this one won't take you without references. Your family in Shropshire doesn't know what to do with you. You have no income and no address and no one to vouch for you. This is not the worst case scenario. This is the normal case scenario. So the rules of Mrs. Pemberton's house are not petty restrictions. They are load-bearing. Walls. They hold everything up. No male visitors above the ground floor. This means no man comes to your room. If someone wants to call on you, a brother, a cousin, a man who is courting you through proper channels, he waits in the entrance hall or the sitting room on the ground floor in plain view, the door open, Mrs. Pemberton within earshot, gas lights out at 10. This means whatever you're doing at 10, you're doing it in darkness after that. Reading, writing letters, sitting with your thoughts. The gas is turned off at the meter downstairs, not by request. The gas goes off at 10 because Mrs. Pemberton turns it off at 10, and that is the end of that. No cooking in rooms. This means if you are hungry after supper, which is at 6:30 and is over by 7 at the latest, there's nothing for you until breakfast the next morning. There's no kitchen you can access. The cold store is locked. The pantry is locked. If you come in at 9 in the evening after a long day and you haven't eaten since noon, which happens, you go to bed hungry. Rent due every Monday morning without exception. This means on Sunday evening you count out 7 shillings and 6pence and put it in the envelope Mrs. Pemberton provides, and you hand it over before 8 o'clock Monday morning, and there is no negotiation about this. There is a woman. She was gone before you arrived. But Miss Thornton told you the story, once, quickly, without sentimentality. A woman who was 2 weeks behind on her rent and was told to leave with 1 hour's notice. On a Thursday evening in January, in the rain, she knocked on the door of the house across the street, the one that takes men. You don't know what happened after that. Miss Thornton's eyes, when she told you this, said she had some idea, and it was not a pleasant one, and it was also not something she was going to say out loud. You understood. The unwritten rules build on the written ones like stories build on their foundations. You don't ask other women in the house how much they earn. You don't ask about their families if they don't offer. You don't speculate out loud about why someone looks different on a Monday morning than they did on Friday. You don't leave evidence of any kind that could be misinterpreted. Letters visible on your washstand, meetings arranged in whispers, any indication that your life contains elements not suitable for the dining room table. You inhabit your respectability completely and continuously. It is, in its way, exhausting, not the respectability itself. You're not chafing against it in any dramatic way. You're not secretly transgressive. You're a schoolmaster's daughter from Shropshire, and you genuinely believe in most of the values this life runs on. It's the constant performance of it. The awareness that you are always being assessed, always being read. That every morning your collar and your expression and the way you say good morning communicates something about your status, your stability, your fitness to live in this house and work in that office and take up this particular space in this particular city. The maintenance of it never stops. You are doing it right now, in this room, in this diary, thinking through how to present yourself tomorrow. The first week is mostly orientation, getting the rhythms right, learning when to be where, understanding the pressure of the day, not the big pressures, not the existential ones, but the small, constant ones that make up the texture of the life. How to get to the bathroom before Miss Vickers on a day when you know she has an early fitting. Wake at 6:10 instead of 6:20. Move quietly. The third stair creaks on the right side. Go left. How to eat your breakfast fast enough to get a third cup of tea from the first pot. Arrive at 7 on the dot. Eat the porridge first. It's hot. Toast can be eaten while standing. How to do 8 hours at the Remington without your back becoming a problem by 4 o'clock. Stand up every hour, walk to the window, roll your shoulders, don't let the stiffness calcify. How to make the walk home from the omnibus stop interesting enough to be something you look forward to rather than something you endure. Take the slightly longer route past the greengrocer on Gibson Street, who always has the good apples in September. Buy one for a halfpenny. Eat it before you reach the front door, or Mrs. Pemberton will see you eating in the street, which she considers unsuitable. Small optimizations, small victories, the kind of practical wisdom that accumulates not from big experiences, but from repetition. From doing the same day again and again until you understand it. The second week brings rain. Not the catastrophic rain of the autumn proper, that comes later. This is pre-autumn rain, the kind that London delivers in September to remind you that summer was always borrowed time. Cold enough to be unpleasant, persistent enough to make everything slightly damp, not dramatic enough to make it feel significant. Your boots, despite your care, acquire a high water mark of London mud that requires 10 minutes, with a brush every evening to remove. Your hair, which behaves perfectly in dry weather, develops opinions in damp weather that take an extra 5 minutes to overcome every morning. The fog returns, thicker this time. There are mornings when the fog is so dense that the buildings across the street are shapes rather than buildings, suggestions of solid matter rather than solid matter. The omnibus goes slower. The horses, patient in most weathers, move through the fog with a careful deliberateness, their breath steaming. The gaslight through the fog is something. At night, walking back from the omnibus stop, the gas lamps create small spheres of orange light that float in the grey air like lanterns hung by someone invisible. You walk between them from one circle of warmth to the next, the darkness between each lamp, absolute in a way that city darkness rarely is now. You don't mind it, actually. There's something about London fog that makes the city feel not smaller, exactly, but more intimate, as though the fog is pulling the world in close, reducing it to what's immediately around you. this pavement, this lamp, these sounds, the distant horse, the boy selling papers, the slice of music from a pub somewhere to the left that appears and disappears as you walk past. Miss Thornton, when you mention this, gives you a look that is approximately 60% fond and 40% warning. You'll stop finding fog romantic in November, she says, when it's been raining for 3 weeks and you've walked through 8 different people's tobacco smoke before you've even gotten to your office. Fog is just coal and disease and the River Thames looking to expand its territory. She thinks about this for a moment. Also, it's quite beautiful, she concedes. In the second week, you and Miss Hartley have your first real conversation. It happens on a Wednesday evening. Supper is done. Boiled fish, which Mrs. Collins executes with the same flat competence she brings to everything. And you're both in the sitting room, which is a room on the ground floor that contains 2 sofas, an armchair with a loose arm that requires navigating carefully, a piano that nobody currently in the house plays, a small bookshelf with a collection of volumes so heterogeneous that someone clearly assembled it from the leftovers of at least 4 different libraries, and a fire that has been lit for the first time tonight because the temperature has dropped enough to justify it. Coal fires, when they're going properly, produce a specific kind of warmth that central heating will never quite replicate. It comes at you in waves, stronger when the coals shift, and it has a smell, not unpleasant, a mineral, slightly sulphurous smell, that in London in 1887 is simply the smell of being warm indoors. You're sitting in the good end of the sofa nearest the fire, reading a novel you borrowed from the bookshelf, something from 1874, a title you don't recognise by a writer you've never heard of. It's not particularly good, but it's not bad either, and it's something to do with your hands that doesn't involve the Remington. Miss Hartley comes in, finds the armchair empty, and sits in it, with the careful management of the loose arm that everyone in the house has internalised by now. She has a piece of embroidery with her, or it looks like embroidery at first, but when you glance at it you see it's actually a piece of fabric she's hemming by hand. Small, neat stitches, the needle pulling through with a whisper. You read. She hems. Then she says, not looking up, "Where are you from?" You tell her. She says, "Shropshire. I've never been." "Most people haven't," you say. "It's quite beautiful and very quiet and nothing happens there." That sounds appealing right now. You look up. Something in her voice. "Long day?" you say. She sets the hemming in her lap and looks at the fire. The firelight does interesting things to her face, makes her look simultaneously older and younger, more complicated. Mrs. Cartwright, my employer, had her nephew to dinner tonight, she says. He's a barrister, very successful, very convinced of this. He spent approximately 2 hours explaining to us both why women shouldn't be admitted to the legal profession. A pause. The irony being that I'm sitting across from a woman who reads more case history than he ever will, and who's been running a complex household and managing a not insignificant financial estate on behalf of Mrs. Cartwright for 3 years. And I am being explained to about capacity. She picks up the hemming again. It's quite tiring, she says, being explained to. And this moment in the sitting room with the fire and the loose arm of the chair and the cold fog outside is when you decide you would very much like to be friends with Eleanor Hartley. How long have you been at it, you ask? At Mrs. Cartwright's? 3 years. You hesitate. Do you like it? The work? She considers this with the seriousness the question deserves. I like Mrs. Cartwright, she says eventually. She's sharp, underneath the widow's weeds, and lonely. She's been lonely since her husband died, and she's made kind of peace with it, but not entirely. There are evenings when she talks about him and her whole face changes. She looks at her stitches. I like that I can do something for her. Make the days a little less empty. That part I like. The barrister nephews I could do without. You read for a while. She hems. Then she says, "What's the typewriting like?" "Like playing an instrument," you say, "except the instrument is made of iron and the music it makes is contracts." She laughs. "A real one. Brief. Genuine. But you're good at it." "I'm fast," you say, "and accurate mostly, Mr." Hartington seems satisfied, which from Mr. Hartington is, well, it's something. "Is it what you thought it would be? Coming to London? You think about this?" "No," you say honestly. "It's harder than I thought, and stranger than I thought, and sometimes I miss home in ways I wasn't prepared for. But it's real. What I'm doing is real, and I'm the one doing it, and that matters. At home, it felt like everything important was waiting for me to arrive, and I couldn't find the door." Miss Hartley looks at you for a moment. "Yes," she says quietly, "exactly that." The fire shifts. A lump of coal breaks and settles with a soft sound. The warmth increases briefly, then finds a new level. "I'm Eleanor," she says. "Clara," you say. You go back to your books. By the third week you have become furniture. This is meant as a compliment. In a boarding house, becoming furniture means you've been integrated. The rhythms of the house have absorbed you. You pass on the stairs without the slight stiffness of people not yet sure of each other. Mrs. Pemberton addresses you by name without having to think about it. Mrs. Collins, the cook, will sometimes leave a small extra piece of bread for you at breakfast, because she has noticed you tend to need a second one, and she finds the system of rationing mildly absurd when there's bread available. You know things. You know that the hot water pipe on the second floor makes a hammering sound at approximately 2 in the morning on nights when the pressure fluctuates, and that this sound will wake you the first 3 times and then become part of the background of sleep, the way church bells become background. You know that there is a loose floorboard in the corridor outside Miss Thornton's room, and that if you step on it at any point between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m., Miss Thornton will hear it and briefly be awake, and the slight tightness around her eyes at breakfast will tell you. You know which chair in the sitting room has the broken spring on the left side and has to be approached accordingly. You know the sound of this house at night. Every house has a different sound at night, its own settling and creaking, its own personality of silence. And you know this one now, the way it contracts slightly in the cold. The sound of the rain on the roof at the attic level carrying down through the floors. The particular footfall of each woman in the house. Mrs. Pemberton's brisk step on the stairs. Miss Thornton's slightly uneven one. Left foot heavier than right. Miss Watkins' light, quick tread, like something trying not to be heard. And Miss Hartley's, Eleanor's footfall, which is even and measured and always, you have noticed, slightly later than everyone else's. She stays up later, not dramatically later, maybe 11 rather than 10, after the gas is out, which means she must be doing whatever she does in the dark or by candlelight, which is technically against Mrs. Pemberton's fire safety rules, but is probably happening anyway in at least 3 rooms in this house. You hear her go past your door at 11, 11:10, quarter past. You are usually asleep by then, but you hear her. The third week also brings your first real mistake at work. It's on a Thursday afternoon about 3 o'clock, when the combination of insufficient sleep and the particular grinding tedium of producing the same type of legal document for the 6th time that day produces a kind of mechanical vacancy of attention. You are copying a conveyance, and you transpose two numbers in a property reference. Something like 14 becomes 41, and the error isn't discovered until the document has gone to Mr. Hartington. He calls you into his office. Mr. Hartington's office is a room that takes being serious very seriously. It has dark panelling, a large desk, shelves of law books so dense with volumes that light appears not to enter freely. It smells of pipe tobacco and leather, and the particular smell of important paper. He has your document in front of him. The error is circled in red. "Miss Webb," he says. "Sir," you say, "this document will have to be redone." "Yes, sir." Errors in legal documents have consequences. He is not shouting. He is using the voice that is worse than shouting. Measured, precise, addressing you as an adult who should understand the implications. Property references exist for reasons. A transposition of this kind, in a completed document, could cause significant difficulty. "Yes, sir, I understand. I apologize." A pause that lasts about 4 seconds and feels longer. "Redo it this afternoon. I'll want it on my desk by 5. "Yes, sir." You return to your room and redo it. Your hands, when you sit down, are shaking very slightly. Not from fear exactly, but from the physical response to being called to account, the adrenaline of it, the flush of shame, the tightening in the chest. You breathe through it. You retype the document. No errors this time. You check it 3 times. By 5 o'clock it is on Mr. Hartington's desk, and he says nothing more about it, which means it's acceptable, and you walk to the omnibus stop feeling the particular fatigue that comes not from physical work, but from sustained attention under pressure. The fog is thicker tonight. The orange lamps burn in it. You are so tired you buy a penny pie from a stall near the omnibus stop and eat it walking, which Mrs. Pemberton would consider unsuitable and which you consider necessary. It has something that might be beef in it. The pastry is dense and slightly salty and exactly what you need. You don't ask about the beef. This is the section where the city opens up. Sunday comes at last. Sunday is constrained in its own particular way. The law and custom of 1887 England means that Sunday is the Lord's Day, and the Lord's Day is for church and rest and circumscribed leisure, and definitely not for commerce. The shops are shut. The omnibuses run a reduced service. The city's relentless machinery drops into a lower gear. Mrs. Pemberton attends the morning service at the church at the end of the road, 8:30 sharp every Sunday without exception. She expects her boarders to attend some form of Sunday service, and she does not ask directly, but the asking is somehow present in her face on Monday mornings, when she looks around the breakfast table. You go. Not because you're not a believer, particularly. You're indifferent in the way educated people of your era are often indifferently agnostic. But because the church on Sundays is warm and the sermon is not always terrible, and it fills the morning hours that would otherwise hang heavy. This Sunday, though, this one is different. Eleanor knocks on your door at 9:30 with her coat already on. "I'm going to Hampstead," she says. "I go most Sundays when the weather's decent enough. Come if you want." The weather is, objectively, decent. Cold, but clear. The fog has lifted. The sky over London is a pale winter blue that in other contexts would be beautiful, and in London at this time of year qualifies as a meteorological gift. You put your coat on. The journey to Hampstead takes the best part of an hour. Omnibus to Gospel Oak, then a long walk up the hill. Eleanor knows the route without thinking about it, steering you through side streets and shortcuts, with the confidence of long practice. As you climb, the city changes. Islington falls away behind you. The streets get quieter, the houses get larger. The air, and this is real, this is not imagination. The air is different up here, thinner of coal smoke, sharper. It carries something from further north, something that hasn't passed through a million chimneys before it reaches your lungs. You breathe it in, and your lungs notice. And then Parliament Hill, the top of the hill, the view. And when I tell you about the view from Parliament Hill in 1887, I need you to understand that there is no obstruction. The buildings of the city extend, but none of them, not a single one, rises high enough to break the line. London spreads below you like a document laid out for examination. There is the river. You can see it from here. The Thames, curving west and east, the afternoon light catching it and turning it silver in some places, and a flat dark grey in others. You can see the ships in the upper reaches, the bridges, Westminster, Waterloo, the suspension bridge at Hammersmith, each one a thin line across the silver, and above everything else just barely visible through the faint haze that always sits over London like a permanent thought, the dome of St. Paul's, Wren's dome, 365 feet from the ground to the cross at the top. They built it between 1675 and 1710 on the site of the old cathedral that burned in the Great Fire. You can see it from here, and it's been visible from here for 177 years, and your great-great-grandparents could have stood on this hill and seen the same thing. It doesn't look real from this distance. It looks like something someone drew on the sky. The first time I came up here, Eleanor says beside you, I cried, which is embarrassing. It's not embarrassing. It's a bit embarrassing, she pauses. I'd been in London for 2 weeks and I was not doing well. You know that feeling when the city is bigger than you thought and you're smaller than you thought, and you're not sure the arithmetic is going to work out. Yes, you say. I came up here and I stood where we're standing now and I looked at all of it, and I thought, all of that is happening right now, down there, all of those lives, all of that complexity, all of that noise and dirt and difficulty, and here I am, part of it. Up here on this hill, but also down there, somewhere in all of those streets. And I don't know why that helped, but it did. It made me feel not small, something else, like the right size maybe, like there was a right size and I was it. You stand there for a while, both of you, watching the city. The wind on the heath is cold and clean and carries the smell of wet grass and something mineral, the smell of London's particular earth. Birds, crows mostly, and a pair of kestrels hunting over the open ground, move against the pale sky. Down below, somewhere in all those streets, the typewriting office, the boarding house, Mrs. Pemberton's moral arithmetic, the cold bathroom, the watered-down porridge, the 7 and 6pence a week. Up here, just this. Just the view and the cold and the woman standing beside you who is becoming your friend. I keep thinking, you say, about what this all looked like before the city. What was here before all of that? Fields, Eleanor says, villages, marshes along the river. My great-grandmother was born about 40 miles east of where we're standing, in a village that is now somewhere in that. You gesture at the rooftops. I don't know which bit, just, somewhere in there. The city ate it. The city ate everything, you say, and here we are inside it, being digested. Eleanor laughs. That's the most accurate description of London I've ever heard. A church bell strikes the hour somewhere below, then another, slightly different tone, then a third, overlapping. Time calling you back down. "Come on," Eleanor says. "There's a woman on the path down who sells hot chestnuts. Best thing about autumn." You follow her down the hill. The chestnuts come in a paper cone, warm enough to hold against your palms the whole walk back to the omnibus stop. They taste of smoke and sweetness and the specific warmth of something good on a cold day. Your hands, still stiff from the week's typing, absorb the heat from the paper cone gratefully. The thing is, you like Eleanor Hartley. You like her straightforwardly, without qualification, in a way that is relatively rare for you. You tend toward a kind of cautious assessment of people that takes time to resolve into warmth. You approach new acquaintances the way you approach new documents, with attention to detail, a willingness to find them interesting, and a professional reserve that waits for evidence before committing. Eleanor bypassed that somehow. Maybe it was the sitting room conversation. Maybe it was Parliament Hill. Maybe it's the way she takes serious things seriously, and the rest with a kind of dry humour that you recognise as a coping strategy used by intelligent women who have learned that outrage has limited practical value. But as the third week becomes the fourth, you start to notice things that make you not worried, not yet, but attentive. Small things. The collar again. Not often, but occasionally. A lightness about her on certain mornings that isn't connected to anything you can identify. No particular good news at work. No special occasion. A lightness that comes from somewhere else, and that she manages carefully at the breakfast table, keeping it to herself, folding it away. The late footsteps past your door, which were 11 o'clock, now sometimes later, 11:30, once, a Sunday night, nearly midnight. You hear her, and you think nothing of it, and then you think something of it, and then you very carefully think nothing of it again. Because what Eleanor does in her own room in the dark is Eleanor's business. And your job is not to be a person who notices things and then speculates about them, but you are a person who notices things. It's a professional hazard of working with documents. You read them very carefully. There is also this. On a Tuesday, the last week of the month, you are coming back from work slightly later than usual. Mr. Hartington had an urgent document that needed to be completed. No more explanation given. You stayed until 6, and you arrive at Cold Harbour Street at approximately 6:15. The dining room supper is at 6:30. You come in through the front door and you're in the entrance hall taking your coat off when you hear something. It's not a dramatic sound. It's a voice. A man's voice, low and quick, and then Eleanor's voice. A murmur, and then the sound of the sitting room door closing. You stand still for a moment. The ground floor is where male visitors are permitted. That is the rule. You can have a visitor in the sitting room or the entrance hall in plain sight, door open, but the sitting room door is closed, and it is 6:15 on a Tuesday. And Mrs. Pemberton is in the kitchen discussing the supper arrangements with Mrs. Collins, and nobody else is home yet. You go upstairs. You don't say anything to anyone, but you know what you heard, and you know it means something, and the something it means is both simple and, in the world you're living in, very dangerous. The morning after, the breakfast table is normal. That is, everything about it is exactly the same. The porridge, the cold toast, the pot of tea, Miss Thornton reading her newspaper, Miss Ramsbottom talking about the school board, Miss Watkins looking at the garden. Eleanor comes in at 7:22. Her collar is perfect. She sits. She pours her tea. She eats her toast. She looks at nothing in particular with her usual slightly distant expression. But you are a person who reads documents very carefully, and the slight tightness at the corner of her left eye, the one that appears when she's managing something, you know that one now. You've seen it enough. She's being very careful this morning. You eat your breakfast. You say good morning. You ask her, in a normal tone, how Mrs. Cartwright was yesterday. Well, thank you, she says. Her nephew wasn't there, which helps. You nod. You go back to your porridge. Nothing is said. Nothing will be said. It rains on Thursday, not the light persistent rain of the second week. This is autumn rain, the real kind, the kind that arrives with the conviction of something that has been building and is now simply executing a plan. It starts at 5:30 in the morning and is still going at noon, and the London streets under it are a particular kind of miserable. The mud, which in dry weather is mostly contained to the sides of the roads and the worst of the unpaved alleys, spreads. It spreads in the way that London mud spreads, which is with intention, covering everything within range. Your boots, carefully cleaned on Wednesday night, are dark to the ankle by the time you reach the omnibus stop. The omnibus is late, then later. Then the driver calls down that there's a cart overturned in Pentonville Road, and the traffic is backed up past the Angel. You wait. You and approximately a dozen other people waiting at the stop, all of you arranged in the specific posture of people standing in the rain, shoulders slightly forward, head slightly down, present in the body only in the most minimal sense, while the mind retreats to somewhere drier. The rain on your hat is a small steady percussion. The hat keeps your head dry mostly. The collar of your coat is getting damp. A trickle finds the gap between your collar and your neck and makes its way down. You are cold and damp and 20 minutes late, and your boots are ruined, and you still have 7.5 hours of typing ahead of you. This is Thursday in London in September 1887. The omnibus arrives eventually. You are 25 minutes late to work, and Mr. Hartington's clerk gives you a look over his spectacles that contains a quantity of judgment that you consider disproportionate to the circumstances but say nothing about. You sit down at the Remington. Your fingers are cold and stiff and slightly damp, and the first few minutes of typing are more forceful than usual as you work the cold out of them. Each keystroke a small act of restoration. By 10 o'clock you're warm enough. By noon you've completed 3 documents. By 3 o'clock the rain outside the courtyard window has reduced itself to a sullen drizzle, and your boots, lined up under the desk, are drying slowly with the particular smell of wet leather warming. You buy a hot pie at the stand near the omnibus stop on the way home. You eat it walking. The fog is coming back in off the river. At supper, Miss Thornton is in a communicative mood, which is rare and valuable. She has been to a meeting, not a work meeting, a meeting of the Women's Suffrage Petition Committee, which she attends on the 3rd Thursday of every month, and which she never mentions at the breakfast table, because Mrs. Pemberton has views on political women that she has never articulated directly, but has made unmistakably clear through the medium of facial expression. At supper tonight, though, Mrs. Pemberton has retired early with what she describes as one of her heads, and the table has a slightly different atmosphere. Lighter, more like people and less like people performing being people. Miss Thornton tells you about the meeting while eating her stewed mutton with considerably more enthusiasm than the mutton probably merits. She is incandescent about something the petition committee has managed, which involves a letter to a member of Parliament, which has received a reply that wasn't immediately dismissive, which apparently constitutes a breakthrough. You listen to her talk and think about how much energy it takes. The letter writing and the meeting going and the sustained hopeful pressure on a system that is not particularly interested in being pressed. Does it ever feel futile, you ask? She looks at you. Yes, she says frankly, almost every week. And then I go to the meeting, and there are 30 women in a room, all being furious and organised about the same thing, and it stops feeling futile for another month, and then it starts feeling futile again, and so on. She eats a bit of mutton. That's just what it is, she says. The work is the work. You show up or you don't. I've decided to show up. Edith, Ramsbottom is nodding vigorously. She has been a suffrage supporter since she was 17 and attended her first meeting in her hometown and was told by the organiser that she couldn't vote on the committee agenda because she was too young and a girl, and that was, she said once, the precise moment she understood what the fight was about. Miss Watkins is listening quietly from the end of the table. She doesn't speak about politics mostly, but she's listening. And Eleanor. Eleanor is eating her supper and following the conversation, and she says at one point, "The thing is, we already run everything. Women, the households, the social calendars, the administration of the estates of men who couldn't be trusted to post a letter without being reminded. We run all of it. We just don't get to sign the documents." There's a short silence. "That's exactly it," Miss Thornton says, pointing her fork at Eleanor with an expression of firm agreement. Eleanor shrugs, goes back to her mutton, but you watched her face when she said it, and there was something there. Not just political opinion, something personal, something specific. The man in the sitting room, whose voice was low and quick. The closed door. The month is almost done. And I want to stay here with you for a moment in the last few days before the thing happens. Because the thing that happens is, it will change the texture of everything. It will change what you know and what you feel about the house, and about Mrs. Pemberton, and about the rules and what they cost. But before that, the last days of September are beautiful. This happens in London sometimes. September, after the early autumn rain, can produce a week of crystalline cold and clear weather that makes the whole city briefly look like a place you'd choose to live. The light goes golden in the late afternoon, the long-angled light of autumn that makes everything look slightly more significant than it is. The plane trees on the better streets turn yellow at the edges. The air smells of fallen leaves and coal fire starting up again for the season, and the particular London smell of baking bread from the bakeries in the morning, floating out over the fog. You walk to work on Monday and Tuesday with your face up, feeling the thin warmth of the sun. You have learned to bank this, to hold it consciously. The city is giving you something free and you take it. At work, you complete a long and complicated conveyance document that has been on your desk for 2 weeks. It required 17 pages of close, careful typing. The kind of work that requires your full attention for hours at a stretch. And when you deliver it to Mr. Hartington's clerk on Tuesday afternoon, the clerk looks at it and says, without looking up, "Good, he's been waiting for this," which from him is approximately equivalent to a standing ovation. You walk home on Tuesday evening along the longer route, past the greengrocer, past the apple stall, across the park, where the last roses of the season are still barely holding on, and you feel something that is not quite contentment. Contentment is too settled, too arrived, but something like it. Something like the feeling of being in the right place, doing the right thing for your own particular and specific life. You are, you think, going to be all right. London is, you think, going to work out. Wednesday morning, the 3rd of October. Technically still autumn. Practically almost winter. You're at the breakfast table at 7. The porridge is hot, the toast is cold, the tea is strong. Miss Thornton is reading her newspaper. Miss Watkins is looking at the garden. 7:22, 7:23, 7:25. Miss Hartley doesn't come down. You're putting your coat on in the entrance hall when you hear Mrs. Pemberton. She's on the first floor landing. Her voice, which is normally the voice of a woman who has arranged her emotions into a very small, very controlled space, is different. Not loud, not raised, but tight. As though she is pressing each word through a very narrow opening and controlling the pressure very carefully. Miss Hartley, I require a word with you. A pause. Now, if you please. You button your coat. Your fingers are steady. You focus on the buttons. You don't look up the stairs. From above, Eleanor's door opens. Footsteps. Of course, Mrs. Pemberton. Eleanor's voice is absolutely level, entirely composed. You go out the front door, you close it behind you. You stand on the step for a moment. The air is cold. The street is beginning its morning noise. The knife grinder making his early rounds, his cartwheel squealing. A milk cart passing, the bottles chiming lightly against each other. Normal. Everything normal. You walk to the omnibus stop. At the typewriter, you work. You work because that is what you do. Because the documents don't care about what's happening on Cold Harbour Street, and your fingers know the keys now. Know them. The way you know a path you've walked 100 times, and the work carries you through the morning without your attention being fully required. But underneath the work, the thought, what you heard on Tuesday, the closed sitting room door, the voice, what Mrs. Pemberton heard or saw or was told by someone who heard or saw. And what happens now? At lunchtime, you walk around the block twice, quickly, in the cold air, not because you need to, but because you need to move. You come home at 5 to find the house different. You can feel it before you know what it is, the way you can sometimes feel the temperature drop before you consciously register it as cold. Just different. A different air. Nora, the housemaid, is in the entrance hall pretending to sweep, which means she's actually listening. Miss Watkins is in the sitting room, very still, with her embroidery in her lap, and the look of a person who has recently heard something and is processing it with some difficulty. Miss Thornton passes you on the stairs going up. She gives you a look that she must intend to be neutral, and which communicates a great deal. You don't ask. You go to your room, you take off your coat, you sit on the edge of the bed, you look at the wall. The wall is grey plaster, slightly uneven. It has a crack near the window that is probably settling and is definitely not structural, and has been there, you'd guess, for years. You sit and look at it for about 5 minutes. Then you put your coat back on and go to find Eleanor. Her room is on the 2nd floor, around the corner from yours. You knock twice, quietly. Silence. Then, who is it? Clara. The door opens. Eleanor is sitting on the edge of a bed. She's fully dressed, but her jacket is off, folded on the chair. Her hair has a slight looseness to it that suggests it was done this morning and hasn't been looked at since. On the washstand, the water jug is half empty. She looks at you steadily. You know, she says, it isn't a question. I don't know anything, you say carefully. I heard a voice. On Tuesday evening, in the sitting room. A pause. Come in, she says. Close the door. His name is Thomas. You learn this in pieces over the next 20 minutes, sitting on the wooden chair by the window while Eleanor sits on the bed, and says the things that have clearly been organising themselves in her all day, waiting for a person to say them to. Thomas Whiting, 28. Works for a shipping company near Billingsgate. A clerk position, reasonably well paid, reasonably respectable. Not a gentleman of leisure, not a labourer. The middle that doesn't have a name for itself. They met 8 months ago through his aunt, who is an acquaintance of Mrs. Cartwright's. A social connection, entirely proper, entirely legitimate. Tea on a Wednesday afternoon, a garden party in July, introductions made, conversation begun, and continued. He's good, Eleanor says. There is something stripped down about how, she says it, not romantic, not poetic, just the word that is true, not exciting, not any particular thing I thought I wanted when I was younger and had ideas, just good, kind, honest, interested in what I actually think. She looks at the window, which turns out to be rarer than I expected. What happened, in the condensed and careful version she gives you, is this. He came to call, as he's done a handful of times, being shown into the ground floor sitting room where Eleanor received him properly. On the occasion you know about, Mrs. Pemberton was in the kitchen. The door was closed not from impropriety, but because Miss Vickers had come down with a head cold and was resting in her room, and the sound of conversation carries. A closed door, in this house, with a man on the other side of it. Mrs. Pemberton either saw it herself, or Nora did and mentioned it. The exact mechanism is not clear, and at this point the exact mechanism is somewhat beside the point. What matters is that this morning Mrs. Pemberton called Eleanor into her parlour and told her that her conduct had been, she used the word, inappropriate, twice, and that she had a responsibility to the other ladies in the house, and that the character of the establishment could not be risked, and that Eleanor's tenancy would end at the end of the month. End of the month, Friday, 2 days from now. Eleanor tells you this with her hands clasped in her lap, and her posture absolutely straight, and her face doing something very controlled, that is the face of a woman holding herself together by will. She has the right to do it, Eleanor says. Technically, the rules are the rules. I knew the rules. A closed door, you say, at 6:30 in the evening, with a man you're courting properly, with a man, Clara. In this house, that's what matters. A man was in the sitting room with the door closed, and I was in the room, and the door was closed. Nothing happened. A pause. Nothing has ever happened. He comes to call, we sit and talk. We walk on Sundays sometimes. He's asked me to marry him. You go very still. When? 2 weeks ago, on a Sunday. On Hampstead Heath, actually. A very small, brief expression that might in other circumstances be called a smile. He brought me chestnuts. The word you want doesn't come. I haven't answered him yet, Eleanor says. I needed to think about the practical things, what it means for my work, for my position, for... She stops, looks at her hands. I was taking my time, because it's important, because getting it right matters. And now, she doesn't have her room in 2 days. This is the moment where the Victorian boarding house stops being an interesting historical experience and starts being what it actually is, a mechanism. Mrs. Pemberton's establishment is not cruel exactly. She is not a villain. She runs her house on the rules she has run it on for 23 years, and those rules have kept the house respectable and kept her income steady, and protected the reputations of the women in her care from genuine harm on many occasions. But the rules do not distinguish between harm and the appearance of harm. They do not inquire whether a door was closed from impropriety or consideration for an upstairs neighbour with a head cold. They see the door, and they see the rule, and they act. And Eleanor, 25 years old, with a good position and a growing friendship with the woman sitting across from her, and a man who has asked her to marry him on a hill where you can see the whole city. Eleanor has to find somewhere else to live by Friday evening. The practical reality of this is 2 days to find a room, with sufficient notice that she can produce the reference from Mrs. Pemberton that she will now almost certainly not receive in full, and without which the next establishment will have questions, and questions are almost as bad as the thing itself. What will you do, you ask? Eleanor is quiet for a moment. Thomas has a sister in Camberwell. She's married. They have a spare room. She says it carefully as though reading a document and looking for where the trap is. It's not ideal. It's not my own place, my own room. I'd be beholden to them. But it's a room. It's a room, she agrees, and it buys time. And Thomas? She looks at the window. The thin autumn light is fading. In the street below, the first lamplighter of the evening is making his rounds. I think, she says slowly, that I'm going to go and tell him yes. A pause. Not because of this. She gestures, meaning the room, the house, the whole situation. Or not only because of this, because I've been using the need to think as a way of not deciding, and I know it, and this is... She stops. This is the city being clear with me, about what matters. That seems like the right reason, you say. It's a practical reason, she says, and a right reason both. She meets your eyes. I need you to know, she says quietly, that nothing inappropriate occurred, that I was courted properly, that I closed a door because your neighbour had a headache. I know, you say. I know it. Good, she breathes out. Then I just need to know it myself for the next 40 years or so. She stands up. I should pack some things, she says. I'll go to his sister's tomorrow evening. Give proper notice, even if she won't give me a proper reference. Do the thing right. You stand up too. Do you want help packing? She looks at you. Yes, she says. Thank you. Eleanor's room holds everything that belongs to a life lived with intention, inside a modest container. The wardrobe is organised by season and occasion. When you open it, the smell that comes out is lavender. She keeps a lavender sachet on the shelf, a small concession to the kind of thing you're supposed to want, and also genuinely useful because it does make the clothes smell better than the house would otherwise allow. Books, 7 of them, on the small shelf above the washstand. A Bible, worn but clearly read. A volume of George Eliot. A book of essays. 2 volumes that appear to be reference works on household management. Not the kind you'd read for pleasure, but the kind you buy when you want to know how to run something properly. And 1 novel you don't recognise, small and battered, the spine repaired with cloth. You hand them to her without comment. She wraps them in a cloth and ties it. The personal things, a small photograph in a frame, which you don't look at but which she handles with a care that tells you what it is. A few letters tied with ribbon, which she puts straight into her bag. A small box of the kind that holds jewellery, which produces a sound of very few items when it moves. The practical things, hairpins, stockings, thread, and a small sewing kit, a tin of tooth powder, the bar of soap from the washstand wrapped in paper, an umbrella, a pair of house slippers stuffed with paper for the journey. It takes about 45 minutes. When it's done, the room looks like any room in a boarding house that someone has just vacated. The washstand bare, the wardrobe holding only the few things too big for one bag, the mattress visible, straw filled, holding its impressions. You carry the bags to the landing. Neither of you says anything for a moment. Then Eleanor says, "I'm sorry to leave you with just Miss Watkins and her Sunday crying." You laugh. You can't help it. "I'll manage." "All right," she says. "And when it's all settled, I'd like to still know you if that's acceptable." "That's very acceptable," you say. She picks up her bags. You help her carry them downstairs. Mrs. Pemberton is in her parlour with the door closed. You don't knock. Eleanor leaves a note in the envelope reserved for rent. The letter of formal notice, written in Eleanor's clear, even hand. Correct in every formal particular, courteous without being warm. She goes out the front door. You stand on the step and watch her walk to the end of Cold Harbour Street. Her back straight, her step even, the bags in each hand making her silhouette slightly wider. At the corner she turns and looks back once. You raise your hand. She turns the corner. The dining room that evening is missing one person, and the missing is present. This is a small house. 11 becomes 10, and the table shows it. Miss Watkins is red-eyed, which she's managed by sitting at the far end near the window, beyond the lamp's reach. Miss Thornton eats her supper with slightly more focus than usual, which is her version of being sad. Mrs. Pemberton comes to the table. She sits at the head. She unfolds her napkin. She does not say anything about Miss Hartley. Nothing is said. Nothing will be said. The rules were applied. The outcome was the outcome, and the house continues. You eat your supper. Boiled rabbit tonight. Better than usual, actually. Mrs. Collins has either been inspired by something or found better rabbit. You eat and think about Eleanor on the omnibus to Camberwell, her bags balanced on her knees, probably looking out the window at the darkening city with her composed face, thinking practical thoughts about practical matters. You think about the man, Thomas, who brought her chestnuts on a hill where you can see the whole city, and asked her a question, and is waiting for an answer. And you think about Mrs. Pemberton at the head of the table, working through her rabbit with methodical attention, and what it costs her to run a house like this for 23 years, to hold the line, to be the thing that stands between 11 women and whatever the line is protecting them from. You're not sure whether to be angry at her. You're not sure anger is quite right. You're not sure anything is quite right. After supper, you go to the sitting room. The fire is lit. The loose armchair is empty. You sit in it, in Eleanor's chair, and you read your novel, which has become more interesting over the last week, and you stay in the sitting room until the gas goes off at 10. Then you go upstairs in the dark. Friday, the last day of October. Your month is done, or it will be, at midnight, or at 7:30 tomorrow morning when you wake up and begin the next month, which will be very similar to the last month because that's how months work. But today you wake up at 6:15 and lie still for a moment and take stock. Your month, what is it? It's 7 shillings and 6pence a week for a room on the second floor of a Georgian terrace in Islington. It's 40 words per minute on a Remington No. 2, and documents filed, and Mr. Hartington's clerk's look of mild, grudging acknowledgement. It's the smell of coal smoke and boiled things, and the specific cold damp of a house facing north. It's cold water in the mornings, and the fight for the bathroom, and 2 slices of cold toast, and the first cup of tea with both hands wrapped around it, while the joints loosen. It's Miss Thornton going to her meetings on Thursday evenings. It's Miss Watkins's Sunday evenings and the beautiful singing you've heard twice now through the wall. It's the loose arm of the sitting-room chair. It's the fog on the stairs of the omnibus, the warmth of a penny pie, the smell of wet leather drying. It's Eleanor's room, which is now empty. It's the view from Parliament Hill. It's chestnuts in a paper cone on a cold Sunday morning. It's a closed door at 6:30 in the evening and all the weight that door carried. It's the Remington's bell at the end of each line, marking the end of each line, each day, each thing completed. It's 100,000 keystrokes a day, every working day. This is the month. Let me tell you what you know now that you didn't know at the beginning. You know that respectability is load-bearing. You know what it weighs. You know that the 7 and 6 is not just money. It's an argument you make every week. An argument that says, I belong here, I earn my place, I meet my obligations, I am the reliable sort. You know that cities ask you to do all sorts of things you didn't sign up for. They ask you to witness. They ask you to navigate. They ask you to make the small daily decisions. The halfpenny to the crossing sweeper, the careful management of the bathroom schedule, the moment when you close a door behind you and leave someone to their difficult morning. That add up to the kind of person you're becoming. You know that London is beautiful sometimes, early in the morning with the fog, or late in the afternoon when the light goes gold, or from the top of a hill where you can see the whole silver curve of the river, and that the beauty doesn't negate the cold bathroom and the watered-down porridge and the rules posted on the mantelpiece. They exist simultaneously. The city holds both without apology. You know that Eleanor Hartley is going to be all right. You know this because she walked to the end of the street with her back straight and her step even, and because she closed a door politely when her neighbour had a headache, and because she said he's good in the flat. Exact way, that means she knows what she means. She's going to be fine. You come home from work at 5. The house is its usual self. The smell of coal and damp and whatever Mrs. Collins is doing to the supper. Nora in the entrance hall sweeping with determination. The sound of Miss Ramsbottom's footsteps on the stairs, regular and purposeful. You go to your room. You sit at the washstand and wash your face. The water in the jug is cold, end of the day, never refreshed. You wash anyway. You look in your small mirror, foxed around the edges. Your face looks like itself, like you. The collar you put on this morning is at the Wednesday stage now. Presentable, but tired. Tomorrow you'll wash it and leave it overnight. You change out of your working dress into the other one, the darker one, the one that's a very dark charcoal and therefore suitable for evenings at home where you're not receiving anyone, and you sit for a moment on the edge of your bed. The mattress, shaped by the previous occupant's body, has begun to accommodate yours as well, slowly, imperceptibly. The impressions are starting to overlap. This room is becoming your room, not the room you had in Nesscliffe, which was yours in the deep absolute sense of a place you grew up in, a place that holds your actual history in its walls, but yours in the sense that you know its particular dark and its particular sounds and which board creaks and which drawer sticks. Yours in the sense that you close this door and you are in a space that contains your things, your books on the windowsill, your work dress on its hook, your boots lined up by the washstand, the letter from your mother on the mantelpiece next to Mrs. Pemberton's list of rules. You take the letter down and read it again. Your mother's handwriting, familiar as a face. News of Nesscliffe, the harvest finished, your father down with a cold, your sister Ada apparently writing to someone in Wolverhampton whose identity your mother refers to with studied innocence as a young man Ada has mentioned. The garden, the weather, a cake recipe she's enclosed because she thought you might like it, which you cannot use because you don't have a kitchen. But she doesn't quite understand that yet, and you haven't found the right way to explain it. "We think of you often," she writes at the end. "Your father says to tell you he is proud. We are all proud. You do not have to stay if it's too much. But we think perhaps it is not too much. Write when you can. You fold the letter carefully and put it back on the mantelpiece. You go down to supper. The supper is shepherd's pie." Mrs. Collins has, for reasons known only to herself, put considerably more effort into tonight's shepherd's pie than is strictly required by the terms of her employment. It is... And this is not a word usually applicable to Mrs. Collins' output. Good. The potato is properly mashed without lumps and has been browned on top. The meat filling has actual flavour. Miss Thornton looks at her plate with faint surprise. "This is decent," she says, which from Miss Thornton is approximately equivalent to a rave review. Mrs. Pemberton is at the head of the table, eating her shepherd's pie with the same measured precision she brings to everything. She looks up briefly. "Mrs. Collins," she says in the direction of the kitchen door. "Very satisfactory." From the kitchen, the sound of something being moved on a shelf, which you've learned is Mrs. Collins's version of acknowledgement. The table eats. Miss Watkins has recovered somewhat from yesterday. She asks Miss Ramsbottom about the school board letter, and Miss Ramsbottom embarks on a detailed account of the response she's drafting, which is considerably more interesting than it sounds, because Miss Ramsbottom's strategic thinking about how to approach the board is actually quite sharp, and the conversation around it draws in Miss Thornton, and eventually you. Mrs. Pemberton listens. Occasionally she says something, a question about the school, a clarification about the board structure, that reveals that she is actually following this conversation, has opinions about it. She went to school in 1840-something, she says at one point, when most girls didn't. Her mother thought it mattered. There is a pause. It did matter, she says in her measured way. Miss Ramsbottom says carefully, "Yes." The conversation continues. Outside, the London evening continues its business. The fog is coming in again. The street sounds muffling as it thickens. Somewhere down the road a piano is being played, not skillfully but enthusiastically, something that might once have been a waltz. You eat your shepherd's pie. You are warm. You are fed. You are, at the end of your first month here, after supper, the sitting room, the fire, the good end of the sofa that is, you've realised, simply yours now. No one takes it. It is understood to be yours. Miss Thornton has gone to her room. Miss Ramsbottom is writing at the parlour table, her pen moving quickly. Miss Watkins has her embroidery, working near the lamp. You have your novel, which is very nearly finished. The gas will go off at 10, but for now. The fire makes its low sounds, the shifting of coals, the small collapses, the quiet huffing of the flue. The sound that is, in 1887, simply the sound of warmth. The sound of a room where someone has decided to maintain a certain temperature against the October cold outside. Through the window, the fog, the lamps, the city. It is never quiet. You know that now. London in 1887 is a city of 500,000 people, and that 500,000 people makes, continuously, a sound that is part music and part machinery, and part the simple aggregate of lives being lived in proximity. You can hear it, even now, even late, even through the walls and the fog. Wheels on stone far away, a horse somewhere, the particular sound of hooves on wet pavement, a voice, indistinct, a door. The church at the end of the road marks the quarter hour, then the half, then you're drowsy now, the fire and the book and the week's accumulation of work. The hour, 9 o'clock, 1 more hour. You read. When the gas goes off at 10, the darkness in the house is immediate and complete. You have learned to anticipate it, to be moving toward the door of the sitting room at 5 to 10, so that you're in the entrance hall and have your hand on the newel post of the staircase when the light goes. Tonight you're slightly late. The gas dies. You stand in the sitting room for a moment, absolutely still, letting your eyes adjust. The firelight is fading, the fire banking down for the night, the coals cooling from orange to red to a deep hot near black. It's not enough to navigate by, but it's enough to orient by. The door, the hall. You move carefully through the dark, hands extended slightly. The entrance hall has a faint glow from the fanlight above the front door, the gas lamp in the street outside providing a ghost of illumination, enough to find the staircase. Your hand finds the banister. Up. The stairs creak in their familiar sequence. The third stair, the sixth, the one near the top that has a different sound from the rest, a lower note, like a bass string. Second floor landing. Your door. The room is dark. You undress by feel. Coat on the hook, dress on its hanger, stays loosened. Nightgown from under the pillow. Each action its own familiar sequence, done in darkness often enough that your hands know the order. Into bed. The mattress gives under you, the cold sheets taking your warmth. You lie on your back and look at the ceiling you can't see. Outside the window, or rather outside the wall, since the window faces a brick wall 4 feet away, London continues. You know what's out there. The fog pressing against the windows of all these houses, the crossing sweepers done for the night, their corners abandoned to the mud, the gin shops still open, their lamps burning, their customers in whatever state the evening has brought them to, the taverns busy and getting busier, the police constable on his beat, moving through the fog with his lamp and his methodical patience. Somewhere in Camberwell, Eleanor is in a spare room in her future brother-in-law's house, probably awake, probably thinking through the same practical calculations she always thinks through. Somewhere in Billingsgate, Thomas Whiting is asleep or not asleep, waiting. And here, in this room on the second floor of Mrs. Pemberton's establishment, you are lying in the dark listening to the city breathe. Let me tell you something about cities at night, in the era before electric light. The dark is real. Not the kind of dark you can correct with a switch, the modern dark that is never quite complete. Never quite the absence of light so much as its temporary retirement. The dark of 1887 London at 10 o'clock, once the gas is off and the clouds cover the moon, is actual darkness. The kind your eyes don't adjust to because there's nothing to adjust to. It is, paradoxically, one of the things you've come to value. In the country, dark of this kind is ordinary. In Nestcliff the nights are genuinely dark. The kind of darkness that was the default condition of human sleep for most of human history, the darkness that tells your body, this is night, this is rest, this is the thing you're built for. In London, this dark is scarcer. During the day, the city is relentless. There is always noise, always demand, always the awareness of other people, always the performance of yourself that living in proximity requires. But at 10, when the gas goes off, the house goes genuinely dark, and the city outside recedes to its nighttime murmur, and there's just this, the mattress under you, the sheet over you, the dark above you. Your breathing slows. Your hands, which have typed approximately 100,000 keystrokes this week, and washed themselves in cold water and handled documents and carried bags and wrapped around 2 cups of tea every morning. Your hands lie at your sides and feel their own weight and are grateful. Your feet, which have walked 4 miles a day on average, through fog and rain and the particular resistance of London mud, your feet are entirely still, and they approve of this. Your back, which has maintained its posture for 8 hours at the Remington, and another 8 hours of being a presentable young woman in a world that is watching, your back, for the first time today, is not braced. Everything lets go. In the dark before sleep takes you, let me give you the inventory. 1 month in a Victorian boarding house, 30 days, 7 shillings and 6pence, 30 times, divided into weekly payments handed in their envelopes to Mrs. Pemberton on Monday mornings. Total £1, 2 and 6pence. Approximately 5% of your annual income spent on the room. On the right, to close this door, to have this small space that is yours, to sleep in this particular dark. 30 breakfasts, porridge and cold toast and tea. The tea always hot, at least, if you're on time. The small victory of the porridge's warmth. The halfpenny for the crossing sweeper at the corner 3 days out of 5. The apple from the greengrocer on Gibson Street when the weather allowed. 22.5 working days. Approximately 2,250,000 keystrokes. Conveyances, contracts, letters. The clean movement of information from handwritten draft to typed document, from ambiguity to precision, from someone's thought to something that can be signed and filed and kept. 1 error, corrected, not repeated, 1 friendship, which began in a sitting room by a fire and became real on a hill where you could see the whole city spread out below you like a promise. 1 eviction, which was the cost of a closed door. 1 man with chestnuts who asked a question and is waiting for an answer. 1 view from Parliament Hill. The Thames silver in the autumn light. The dome of St. Paul's above the haze. The ships, the bridges, the endless city. This city, this London of 1887, is a machine. That's not a metaphor, it's fairly literal. It runs on fuel, coal, food, money, human labour, and it produces things. Contracts, documents, finished goods, services, the daily output of 1 million working lives. It takes people in and uses them and shapes them. Some people it shapes into something harder, sharper. It grinds them down to an efficient point. You see this in the crossing sweepers, quick and practical and unsentimental. You see it in the men who've been in the offices for 30 years, becoming a kind of human filing system. You see it in Mrs. Pemberton, who has run a house for 23 years and made herself into an instrument of her own rules. Some people it shapes into something more complicated, like you, like Eleanor. The shaping is still happening. The edges aren't settled yet. You're still being worked on. But here's the thing about being shaped. You have to stay. You have to stay inside the process for it to work. The people who run back to Nestcliff at the first difficulty, or the second, or the third, they don't get shaped. They stay the same. They miss the thing. You don't know yet what the thing is exactly, what London is making you into, but you know you want to find out. Your breathing has been slowing for the last several minutes. You have stopped noticing it, which is how you know sleep is near. The city outside has settled to its quieter note. The hour is late enough that the taverns are thinning, the streets emptying of the casual pedestrian traffic, the fog sitting heavy and still on everything. The church at the end of the road will ring the quarter hour at some point, and you'll hear it, and it will be the last thing you're fully conscious of, and then it will be morning again. The same morning, the different morning, The morning that comes after this one and all the mornings after that. Tomorrow will be Saturday. Half day at the office. Documents in the morning, then finished at 1. Saturday afternoon, which stretches out in front of you with the pleasant openness of unstructured time, precious in its scarcity. There's a library on Upper Street. You've been meaning to go, and you need thread, the brown thread for mending, and the greengrocer will have the last of the good apples before the season turns. Small things. The small things. But here, right now, in this particular dark, in the last minutes before sleep takes you, you are warm enough, fed enough, safe enough, housed and employed and becoming slowly a person who belongs here. There is a letter from your mother on the mantelpiece. There is a friend in Camberwell who is going to be all right. There is a view from a hill that you can return to whenever the city gets too much, and it will get too much, and you will go back. And it will always do what it did the first time. There is work tomorrow and work the day after and all the days. There is this, just this, the dark, the warmth, the sound of the city breathing. Centuries will pass. The house you're lying in will change. The low ceilings of this attic-adjacent room will be replastered, repainted, eventually stripped and renovated and listed as a one-bedroom conversion in a modern estate agency's window. The typewriting machine will become first a typewriter, then an electric typewriter, then a computer, then something else entirely, and the words will still flow through fingers to document, and the documents will still be what holds the world's agreements in place. The fog will go, mostly. The Clean Air Act of 1956 will end the coal fires and the pea soupers and the specific smell of 1887 London that you carry in your lungs right now. But someone will still wake up in this city tomorrow morning, 20 minutes before they want to, and lie in the dark for a moment calculating whether they have time for the bath before the hot water runs out. Someone will still eat their breakfast fast enough to get the last of the tea. Someone will still feel the cold of the evening air and buy something warm and eat it walking home, against the rules of some version of respectability, because they need it and the need is real. Some things don't change. The need for rest doesn't change. Not really. The weight of a week in your hands. The particular exhaustion of being a person, somewhere new, learning what you can carry, that doesn't change, so let it come. Let sleep come the way it came for Clara Webb in her room on Cold Harbour Street on the last Friday of October 1887, after a month of cold water and cold toast and 7 shillings and 6pence and 100,000 keystrokes and 1 friendship and 1 eviction and 1 view from a hill where you could see everything. Let the sounds of the city fade. Let your hands rest. Let the week go. Let the tension in your back, the constant low brace of it, let it release. Just for now. Just for these hours. Let sleep take you the way it took everyone who lay in this dark before you. The woman whose impressions were in your mattress before yours, and the woman before her, and all the women in all the rooms of all the boarding houses of this city since the city began. You've done enough today. You've earned this. You're warm enough, safe enough, here enough. Take the rest. It's there, right there. Close your eyes and let the dark do what it's always done. Good night.